Hello everyone and welcome back to CodedByJade. In this video, I introduce a new video series called Journey into Software Engineering, where I give tips and advice as well as documenting my journey into software engineering. In this video, I'll be giving some quick tips on how to clean up your code, and the examples I'll be giving will be in Python, but I regularly use these features in other languages such as Java as well. As always, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more content. Also, don't forget to follow me on Instagram where you can DM me for personalized advice and see updates about what I'm getting up to. So, you may be wondering, what's the importance of clean code? Well, clean code is vital in upgrading your coding style from personal to production ready, which is what companies are looking for when they hire software engineers. I've been lucky enough to attend a few Spring Insight weeks and be mentored by developers in big tech companies. And a key message they always stress is not only to know how to code, but to know your programming language well. So, here are a few features that you may want to implement into your coding style to clean up your code. Before we get into that, I want to introduce anonymous functions. So an anonymous function is a function that is defined without a name, and this can be used once or saved as a variable. So as we can see, the syntax here is lambda, which is another word for an anonymous function. It takes in arguments and returns the value evaluated after an expression. So in this example, I've saved the anonymous function into a variable called add, and the purpose of this function is to add two numbers together. It has two parameters, x and y, and it returns the value of the expression x plus y. So if I were to call add with the parameters 2 and 4, the result will be 6. So to go a little bit more into the syntax, I'm going to compare it to a function in Python that you're more familiar to, which is defined using the def keyword. So the variable name add is equivalent to the function name add, which, as I said before, this is optional, but just as a comparison. The keyword lambda defines that this is an anonymous function, and the arguments represent the arguments that will be passed into a normal function. Something that you may be less familiar with is the colon, which is synonymous to the return keyword, and the expression, which you would know, which is x plus y. Okay, so the first feature I want to introduce is the keyword map. A map enables you to perform a computation on each element of an iterable object. And by iterable object, I mean things like lists, tuples, anything that you continue to get an exceeding value till you reach the end of that object. And you can use map without using a for or while loop. So here I've stressed the difference between using a for loop and implementing map into your code. So a typical way to square numbers in an array, for an example, is to use a for loop over the range of the length of the array, and for each item square it and save that back into its original place in the array. To the right, now utilizing map, there's two examples here. One for a named function and one for the anonymous function, which I talked about earlier. For the named function, you pass in the name of that function and the iterable object, and you notice here that after using map, you have to transform it back into a list, and that's because map creates an object and you need to transform it back into a list to get it back into that list format that you're expecting. And at the bottom here, I've shown the anonymous function where there's an example of a use once case rather than before, where you can save it into a variable. Here we use it once, we just pass it into the map function, and then we pass in the iterable object. And I've given the example, the list of values from 1 to 5 will be transformed into their square equivalent. The next feature I want to talk about is filter. So filter is similar to map, but instead of performing a computation, it checks each element against a predicate or a condition. And if the condition holds for the element, it stays in the iterable object, otherwise it is removed. So again, I've got an example of what you may have done before using a for loop, and what you could do now using this keyword. So in the for loop, for each element in the object, again I'm using nums, it checks if that element is an even number. If it's not an even number, it removes it from the list. And to the right, we have the filter keyword. It transforms nums if nums was already defined, checks using the anonymous function defined by the lambda that it's an even number. If it's true, it keeps it in the list, otherwise it is removed. So based on what I've talked about now, let me know what the array with values 1 to 10 becomes in the comments. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about list comprehensions. So list comprehensions is an even shorter syntax for creating and editing lists. And the syntax is as below. You have an expression and you want to iterate over each element in an iterable object, given that a certain condition is true. So given that a certain condition is true is the optional part of this syntax, but basically what you are doing is you're checking an expression against an iterable to produce a result. And I've given 2 examples to try and explain this better. So in the example I gave about squaring numbers, here's a list comprehension equivalent to that. You want to define a variable nums, and you want to square it, and the Python syntax for squaring numbers is raising it to the power of 2. And in this instance, instead of having the values 1 to 5 beforehand, you can do the whole operation in one line by iterating over the range of 1 to 5, because as you may know, range is inclusive of start and exclusive in the end. Okay, so a similar example using an equivalent of filter to get even numbers is that you want each value for x in the range 1 to 5 if x is a even number, and that produces the results, 2 and 4. To end this video, I want to discuss how you can practice familiarizing yourself with your target language's syntax and prepare to improve your coding style. So my first advice would be to read up on the documentation of your language, either on that language's website or using other third-party apps. Examples can include Geeks for Geeks or W3 Schools. My second piece of advice is to practice problem-solving questions on LeetCode and HackerRank. Often, time constraints can force you to learn new syntaxes because the code won't pass without meeting a certain time constraint. And you may want to delve into learning about advanced data structures and algorithms to help you speed up your code on top of this new syntax. And my final piece of advice is to read up on how your programming language actually works, either on wiki pages or, if you have time, in conference videos. And conferences that I watch from time to time include C++Con and PyCon, and I'm sure that other languages have their own conventions for when they release new features or encourage people to use their features in more detail. Okay, so that was a few quick tips to help you clean up your code. Comment below tips and tricks that you use to help you achieve cleaner code. Thanks for watching this video, and bye for now.